Hello, Carolyn. Welcome to Fast to Heal Stories. We are so honored and delighted to have you here. It's always fun to talk with a fellow registered dietitian, and you've done a gamut of really cool things in the field. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, let's hop right into kind of your backstory, since this is a podcast about stories, and we'll get into some other topics. We'll be talking a lot about inflammation today, and we'll talk about your really awesome cookbooks. But give us a little. I don't want to do a total spoiler for you, but tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today and why you're so passionate about what you teach now.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a crazy story, but I'm guessing that's probably what you hear from a lot of people. Because if you told me inflammation and managing inflammation and reducing it would kind of be the center of my work, and that's what it's become. If you told me that, 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said, what? Because inflammation wasn't even on my radar. And then if you told me I was going to write a cookbook, 2 cookbooks now, anti-inflammatory eating, I would have said, no way, you got the wrong person. And then I may have even gone a step farther and said, that'll never sell. But yet here I am. So, I graduated, my undergrad is in nutrition and food, and I graduated and I just felt really bummed out. I loved learning. I love being a student. I loved I was just absorbing all the nutrition. But then I got out and I realized, oh my goodness, all these amazing things, jobs that I've been envisioning don't really exist. They exist a little more now, but don't really exist. I just couldn't get real excited about working in a hospital. I'd just previously done my internship there. And, I know this isn't the case in all the places, but, dietitians in the hospital setting I was in just weren't really valued or used. And then I was not going to wear hairnets the rest of my life. I didn't want to be in a kitchen the rest of my life. And there were just, all these wellness jobs and, writing jobs, I was like, oh, those don't exist. So I really just was like, I'm done with nutrition. I'm moving on. I applied to medical school and thought that might be the route. And then I realized, no, I love learning, but I don't love it this much. So yeah. I ended up, luckily, a former intern preceptor called me, and my first job was in cookbook publishing. And I was the editor for what they called their light books at the time. So a lot of their products. So I really, that was my first job. And I learned the whole process from taste testing to editing to writing. And I think I know now I really take for granted just how ingrained that first job, all those skills are. But back to inflammation, like I said, it wasn't even on my radar. 5 or 6 years ago. And it wasn't until I got asked to write an article for Cooking Light magazine on Alzheimer's. And it was a feature. I didn't really know it was this big feature that they were going to submit for an award. But it focused on the connection between food and Alzheimer's disease. And so I just really, anytime I write, I just have to totally immerse myself in the research. That's the only way I can feel confident about it. But it also makes it a lot easier to deal with like any negative comments you get or, trolls on the internet or anything. I'm like, I'm confident I know what I'm talking about. So just immerse myself in the research and learned a lot about the development of Alzheimer's. And there was a huge connection to food and the development of those characteristic plaques and tangles and that lead to the Alzheimer's symptoms. But in the midst of all those plaques and tangles developing and, progressing was this thing called inflammation that was pushing things along in there. And so that's when it first popped on my radar and was kind of like, that's interesting. That article went on to win a James Beard Journalism Award.
That's awesome.
And so I would love to say that's when everything changed, but it wasn't. I went on like we all do, like with just my daily to-do list, writing different articles on different topics, topics that all had some tie to nutrition and health, but that seemed at the time to me vastly different. I was writing, fasting was just coming on the scene. So I was writing a lot about intermittent fasting. I was writing a lot about, autoimmune conditions, diabetes. There's always a market for high blood pressure and, weight loss and that kind of stuff, just a variety of topics for clients. And then when I finally, like 6 months later, sat down and actually took a vacation and stopped, I remember very clearly, I was sitting on the beach and I was just kind of thinking about what I'd written and kind of what I might want to write going forward. And I really and truly had this light bulb moment. And I was like, oh my goodness, all these topics that I've been writing about that have seemed so vastly different and I've given different recommendations for, there is one common thread that ties them all together. And that is they are aggravated. It may be the onset is caused by inflammation or they are aggravated, but inflammation is playing a key role in every single one of these conditions. And I even went back to the research just to check. And I was like, yes, research is in all these things, And so, I thought, oh my goodness, we don't need all these different diets and plans and strategies. Everyone just needs an anti-inflammatory eating plan or lifestyle. And, my initial thought was, oh, this would be great for my parents, as they're aging. And I thought, well, I'm not getting any younger. This would probably be great for me. But then my thought went to my kids, who at the time I believe were maybe 9 and 12. And I thought, oh my goodness, what if I could really implement some of these anti-inflammatory habits into their lives? How might that change the long-term trajectory of their overall health? And so then from that, it became then I was like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. How do I do this? So that became my challenge. How do I make this simple, easy, quick, and stuff that your kids will eat? And that's where my first cookbook came about and how I kind of got immersed in inflammation. And now I've got my second one coming out.
That's amazing. I have to laugh when you're talking about, being in the hospital as a dietitian, because when I was in undergrad and even in my internship, I'm like, I want to be a clinical dietitian. It just the title sounded cool.
Yeah.
It's all science-based. It's working in the hospital. And then I get to my rotations. I'm like, no, there's no way. I'm leafing through charts every day. And, I don't want to downplay the role of the dietitians in the hospitals. They're very important, but my passion was educating and, being out and you really, making a difference with community. And how can I, affect the everyday person to have them adapt something that is going to carry through with future generations. And in the hospital, just, the people are ill and you're more there to support their nutrition in the hospital. It wasn't what I was envisioning.
Yeah.
So
I want to work with them while they can still make changes and they're excited to make changes so that we never get to the hospital, hopefully, because the hospital, people are sick, the last thing someone who's had a heart attack 2 days earlier wants to see is a dietitian,
Oh, I know. And you'd have
start
go educate this person. It's oh, they're hardly awake and their families
they're still in shock and
right. Yeah. So that's funny that you said that, because I had the same thing. I'm I just had this total misconception about what I would be doing. But well, congratulations on the awards you won and the cookbooks that you published. And your cookbook is called Meals That Heal. And then the one that's just coming out. So when this airs, it will have just come out in the last week. But it's called Meals That Heal One Pot. And I wanted to bring you on because we talk a lot about blood sugar dysregulation in this podcast. We talk a lot about insulin resistance and trying to reverse that. And that all starts with inflammation as well. But I haven't had a lot of guests on here who, like you said, it's okay, I can teach these concepts. Let's eat these anti-inflammatory foods. Let's eat in a timed window to bring that inflammation down. But it's like how to actually apply it and have some resources for that is a whole nother ballgame. So that's why I wanted to bring you on and just like, go through the inflammatory process and then just like teach like some down and dirty tips that families can apply from day to day. But let's back up a little bit because I know clinicians like to, and really just anybody in general like to throw that term inflammation around. It's like, oh, it stems from inflammation. It's like,
Yes.
this disease is stemming from inflammation. Let's quiet that inflammation. But what does it actually mean? Other than going and getting a lab test done for maybe your C-reactive protein or whatever it is, like, how do we know we have inflammation? Like what are some of the signs that we can say, hey, I really think some of these issues, why I'm not feeling well, why I can't manage my weight are stemming from inflammation. Like walk us through a few of those things to be.
Yeah. Well, first off, inflammation has kind of become a buzzword, but, and the inflammation as it was designed in the human body was not designed to be a bad thing. Inflammation is actually there to keep us healthy, to heal our bodies. It is supposed to, let's say we get a paper cut on our finger. Well, it hurts, it gets red, maybe even swells a little, or we sprain our ankle and it swells. All of those are signs of good inflammation. It's a sign that the white blood cells and the healing compounds that you need are rushing in, and that the body is fighting off any potential pathogens that could cause infection. But the key to it is it goes away. You have that redness, that pain, and then within 2 to 3 days, it's gone because the inflammation has subsided. And that's how inflammation is supposed to work in the body. Now, if a sprained ankle, you may have that inflammation a little longer, but it's doing what it does. And once you're healed, it goes away. That's how it's supposed to work. And that's what we refer to as acute inflammation. And we need that to fight things off, to heal our body. The type of inflammation that you see all the time in the media and that everybody's blaming for different things is what's referred to as chronic inflammation, chronic or low grade inflammation in the body. And this is triggered mainly by lifestyle irritants. So one thing I forgot to mention with inflammation just in general is that it's a reaction by your immune system. It's something that your immune system triggers. So when you have any kind of inflammation, your immune system is going into overdrive, it's working. Now that's good with that acute inflammation because that's what your immune system is supposed to do. But with chronic or low grade inflammation, lifestyle irritants trigger it. And there's a lot of things in our diet that can trigger it, but also things like stress, particularly long ongoing stress, chronic stress, and not having ways to manage it. A lack of sleep or poor quality sleep. That's a big one that people don't realize. Sedentary, just being sedentary, not getting enough movement. Let's see, there's all kinds of everything that we know we shouldn't do is essentially can act as an irritant to the body, which can trigger this low grade chronic inflammation. And the problem with it is that it doesn't go away unless you purposely do something about it. It just kind of sticks around. And it's not a disease. It's not a condition. I tell people it's more like a process. It's more like kind of just a motor running in the back of your body, if you think about it like that. But you've got to remember that that motor running is the immune system. So the problem is that, after a while, this slowly takes a toll on the immune system, so that when you really do have a bacterial infection or you really do have, a broken bone, your immune system's worn out. It's hard for it to fight off those real threats, with acute inflammation. I describe inflammation. The hard part is it's very subtle. And just assume going forward, when I say inflammation, I'm talking about this low grade chronic inflammation, but it's very, very subtle. I tell people to think of inflammation, the way it starts, almost like a little, just small contained fire in your body. I'm a very visual person. And so I really had to, like, when I was going through all this research, I really just had to figure out a way to visualize it in my mind. And I found a great analogy. It said, compared it to like a small fire in your body. It's contained, it's fine. So something in your lifestyle has triggered that, but it just stays there burning. The other thing that it does is it makes your body maybe a slightly more hypersensitive to other lifestyle irritants. So it's easier for maybe another little small contained fire to start, and then another. And before you know it, the momentum of them all can slowly lead to systemic inflammation. But, so the key is really reversing things early. But the problem is the signs really early are so subtle. It's going to be things like, maybe more frequent headaches than you usually have, or, digestive issues that you hadn't had in the past that are kind of routinely popping up, like bloating, that kind of thing, that you don't really ever remember being an issue, but now kind of bothersome. They're never things that you would stop and be like, oh my gosh, I have to go to the doctor. I have to make a doctor's appointment. No, they're things that are so easy to blow off. Maybe it's, you just can't, your weight won't budge. Or you feel like you are fighting to just maintain your weight, even if you're eating healthy and getting activity and that kind of thing. You may have new skin irritations. You may have more brain fog or difficulty concentrating. It's going to be these subtle things, but it is, and this is easier to say in hindsight, but it's things that are out of your body's norm. So it's not your body's norm. It's not anything you go to the doctor for, but it's also not your norm. Your body's not running like at 100%. Like, let's say you go on vacation and you enjoyed lots of food and, maybe alcohol and that kind of thing. And you get back a week later, you've got some inflammation in there and you feel it. You may feel a little bloated, your head maybe, hurt a little, you kind of, that's a clear, you kind of know you aren't feeling like yourself. You've got to get back to your health and eating. And, that's a perfect example of how we can catch it early and reverse it and get back to, a healthy body. So early signs are subtle. I call those that I've just kind of mentioned are kind of like little yellow flags your body is waving. Some red flags that your body can, indicate inflammation are going to be things like an elevated blood pressure, elevated glucose, elevated hemoglobin A1C, elevated LDL cholesterol or triglycerides. Or if you have normal blood pressure, any of those that I just listed, LDL, blood sugar, but you take medication to keep it in the normal range, that's inflammation as well. And so those are kind of your earlier ones. Still, there's stuff you can do to reverse it, like through your lifestyle, and stop it. But if you don't, then it's just going to continue to grow and gradually lead and, aggravate other things in your body, which can lead to more major chronic issues.
Yeah. And I like to think of inflammation as kind of, that bucket theory that a lot of people have heard of, and we all have different size buckets. We all have different tipping points. So it's like, we're kind of born with this bucket that we can tolerate for toxins and different things that are put into our body or that we come in contact with. But as that bucket fills, like all of a sudden we get to the tipping point, and it's different for everybody. And it's, whatever is triggering that process is different. But yeah, then we're like, we have inflammation. And like you said, it's so subtle to begin with. Like I started having some bloating in college and I'm like, oh, well, and then
that's annoying. Yeah.
Yeah. That I don't remember having this before. And then all of a sudden 10 years have gone by and I'm bloated every single day.
Sorry about this.
No, you're fine. I know that not everybody can see us, but her light just went in her office. I've been recording classes before and I'm like waving my hands, like light back on. Yeah, everybody's bucket's a little bit different. And inflammation can be so subtle, but it's just all of a sudden, like you said, it's like all of a sudden you go to the doctor and your blood pressure's out of control. It's like, wait, when did that happen? And I think a lot of these subtle signs, like the yellow flags, are so common that people just think that it's normal. Like I started to think, oh, it's just my body that's bloated all the time.
Right.
It's like, that's just me. And then I'm like, wait, but I'm only 30. Am I going to be bloated every day? Going,
Yes.
this is terrible.
Those little things are
Yeah.
easy to normalize. I thought
Yes.
Dr. Mark Hyman posted something the other day, and he was something to the effect of, it's not normal to be tired every day, but we've normalized it,
Yes. Yeah.
So,
And because more people are tired than not. So then it's like, oh, well, I'm just run down. I have kids. I have a job. It's like, no, it's like, I feel better in my 40s and have more energy than I did in my 30s because I know how to reduce inflammation. I know how to regulate my blood sugar from day to day so that I have stable energy. But yes, that was a great inflammation, but people need to pay attention to these signs. And I think sometimes too, they're dismissed by healthcare professionals. Like that's just your body, and that can be super frustrating. So being persistent and finding the right healthcare provider, maybe you need to go holistic or integrative, just to take a deeper dive into some of those inflammatory signs so they don't exacerbate into the disease state. But definitely food plays a role with inflammation.
yes.
For sure. I mean, I think everybody can agree with that. I mean, what we're putting into our bodies has a huge effect of how we feel, how we're increasing or decreasing inflammation as well, because it's like once inflammation's there, it can be resolved. You just have to have the proper tools and the proper environment. But how is food coming into play? I know that's a huge question, but maybe you can just how food is coming into play and how that was led to you writing your first cookbook, Meals That Heal, because I know that that's all about bringing inflammation down. Like, where can we start with that?
Yeah. Well, you could kind of break food's role down into kind of 3 areas. One, and really the initial one really has to do with your gut health, and I'll come back to that in a second. But then the other component is decreasing what I call dietary inflammers. And then the last one is increasing these anti-inflammatory foods and compounds that we are not getting enough of. But back to gut health, everybody knows, okay, your gut needs to be healthy, but a lot of times we fail to, maybe connect the dots or explain just why or what is this doing. So when you have a healthy, quote unquote, healthy gut, you have that diverse, varied supply of both beneficial and harmful bacteria, but they keep each other in check. And you've got the beneficial ones making the compounds that you need in your gut. But one thing they also do is these microbes, these bacteria, that collection of them in your gut form what you might think of as like a protective lining inside the intestines. And what this lining does is when you eat food and you digest it into the nutrients, the carbs, the proteins, the fats, the vitamins, the minerals, that microbial lining allows all those good nutrients to pass through the intestinal wall and into the bloodstream. What it doesn't do what it blocks is a lot of the junk in our food. It won't let a lot of those toxins and compounds and chemicals go through the intestinal wall into our bloodstream. And that's a good thing. When our gut health is disrupted, when those bacteria, particularly the beneficial ones, are disrupted, or we've lost some, that protective lining has leaks in it or gaps in it. And that's what you hear sometimes referred to as leaky gut. And the result is all those nutrients can still pass through the intestinal walls, but now a lot of those toxins and a lot of those potential irritants can pass through into the body as well. And those are all going to trigger, or a lot of them are going to trigger inflammation. So really it starts with gut health. The stronger we can keep our gut, the less of those potential irritants that are going to trigger inflammation can get into our body. So gut health plays a key role, and that has got to be part of, part of the process and working to improve that gut health and build it and keep it strong. But then also decreasing some of those key dietary irritants, and none of them will surprise people usually. It's a lot of the chemicals, all those things that get put in food now that aren't naturally in food when it's grown, those kind of things, unnecessary preservatives, the dyes, the colorings, the chemicals, even like the toxins that come from like plastic storage, those kind of things get in our food. Those can act as irritants in the body. And when you have a little bit of inflammation, I think I mentioned this earlier, but when you have a little bit, it's kind of like when you maybe something goes wrong in the morning, and it just hadn't been a great morning, but you get over it, you move on, you think, but then something else kind of happens and it's just easier. It's even easier that second time to get more irritated. That's kind of how inflammation is. Once you have a little, it's easier for when other irritants come around to get irritated. And so your body starts to become almost hyper-reactive or hypersensitive to irritants. So things like gluten that may not have ever bothered you, or certain dairy products that may not have ever bothered you. When you have this inflammation, you may find, oh, that's causing bloating, or that's causing, these symptoms. It's because your body's responding. And so you'll see, new food sensitivities are a sign to me of existing inflammation in your body that is there. But you want to limit those to keep from triggering new inflammation, but also, those irritants from the diet can exacerbate existing, and that's not what we want. But when people always ask me where to start in reducing inflammation, I think that always surprise them a little, because my first place where I tell them to start is with adding some key anti-inflammatory foods. And, I think we're trained from like diet culture that, the way to improve health, the best way is always to like restrict, eliminate, that kind of thing. But I really kind of steer people back to adding first. And this is because there is so much potential power in certain foods and compounds and nutrients. And most everybody is not getting enough of those. And so if you can get in the habit first of adding those key foods, and there's 3 kind of groups that I tell people to add, adding those, one, you're going to up your anti-inflammatory nutrients and those working for you in the body. But 2, you're also going to find it's usually going to naturally clean up your diet a little. And so once you get in the habit of that, then we can move on to maybe minimizing some of the dietary inflammers, the foods that are causing inflammation, minimizing some, but it's not quite, doesn't feel like such a tall or restrictive task at that point. So the place I tell people to start is with 3 groups of foods. Leafy greens, try to get a cup a day. Any kind of leafy green, of course, usually the darker has more compounds, more vitamins, that kind of thing, but just get a cup of leafy greens in a day. And this doesn't necessarily mean salad. This can mean throw a handful in your smoothie, put some on your sandwich or in your wrap. I like to keep baby spinach as one that I'll buy every week, because I can use it like for grain bowls and salads, but I can also toss it at the end of cooking, like into spaghetti sauce. And it just wilts really quick, or saucy skillet dishes. Just a cup a day, aim for that. Berries, fresh or frozen, try to get 2 to 3 cups a week. And that's pretty doable when you think about it. And then the third one is cruciferous vegetables. You want to get around 5 servings in a week. These are those vegetables, cruciferous vegetables. I tell people, usually if it stinks, kind of has that sulfur smell when it's cooking, that's a tip off it's a cruciferous vegetable. So think like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale. Those sulfur compounds are actually really powerful and beneficial to your body. So I tell people, let's start with these 3 things. And, sometimes people need to start with just one and then add the second, but just start with these 3 things. Getting the regular habit of consuming these on a weekly basis, because almost barely anyone is getting enough of these. And there is just so much anti-inflammatory potential power in those foods, nutrients and compounds.
Yeah. And I would go even a step further. Like I've been reading and researching so much about meal order in the recent months, or has come out about meal order and how it potentially can help with blood sugar regulation. So I'm like, those are all those ones that you listed, except for berries, I would have people eat at the tail end of their meal, but starting with those high fiber, low starchy vegetables or a grain salad, cruciferous vegetables, anything non-starchy that's vegetables has been proven in so many studies recently, and actually dating back, they're just like being resurrected now, to help with blood sugar regulation and kind of creating almost like a barrier in your stomach, so that when you do eat the starchier foods, if you choose to eat those or those with sugar, even if they're natural sugars later in the meal, you just don't see the blood sugar effects and the blood spikes. They're really minimized. So
I just started wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and it's just fascinating. I'm just doing it for purely research and to understand, but I've noticed that exact thing. If I have like some raspberries and yogurt at the end of my meal, or maybe 20 minutes after a meal, my blood sugar just almost stays stable somewhat. If I've had like protein and low starchy vegetables for my meal, and my blood sugar will stay stable. But if I start my meal with that yogurt and raspberries, it's going to spike a little more. It's interesting.
I wish everybody could wear a continuous glucose monitor and that they would be easily accessible. And obviously I've had some guests on from like NutriSense and from other companies that offer them without a prescription, but hopefully soon you'll be able to get those without having type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, fatty liver, whatever it is, that they'll be covered by insurance. And it's such a useful tool because everybody's body is just a little bit different.
It's fascinating.
Like just how meal order can change your blood sugar throughout the day. So those are some really great pointers. So one more question about inflammation, and then we'll talk about your cookbook and how to utilize that, and some meal planning tips or meal prep tips for families, because we don't need to say, it goes without saying, basically today's society is just crazy busy for just about everybody. We just don't live in the same time as our parents, our grandparents and great grandparents. Like we just don't have the same lifestyle. So one more question about inflammation. How does it relate to anxiety and depression? Because we've talked a little bit about that on the podcast. We know that it drives insulin resistance. We know that it drives a lot of the diseases that I just talked about, but I know even with my kids, when I say, if you don't have a healthy microbiome and you have, you're putting certain foods in that feed harmful bacteria, that shows up as anxiety and depression. And they just look at me like, really? I'm like, no, like you're feeding bacteria and you're not feeding the neurotransmitters that you need in the gut to produce those hormones. So talk just a little bit about the last couple of years have been so crazy for just about everybody. And we are just seeing so much anxiety, depression, mental health issues, mood disorders, energy disorders. Like, how does inflammation play a role with that? And then we'll move more on to your cookbook.
Yeah, well, this kind of mental health, mental wellness, and the connection to diet and lifestyle is really one of my just areas I'm really passionate about. And I actually have a podcast called Happy Eating that examines the connection between diet and various aspects of mental health and mental wellness. But, I think, first, a lot of people are surprised to find out that, depression and anxiety are considered inflammatory conditions. So while I don't feel comfortable saying that your gut health or your diet is necessarily going to cause the depression or the anxiety, if you have a predisposition to it, it's certainly not helping things. And it could aggravate that inflammation from your diet, can certainly make either of those progress. or maybe you have had depression or anxiety in the past and now you've got it under control. Well, if you have a period where your inflammation is elevated, you may be at risk for that depression and anxiety to come back. And, I don't think I posted it on social media a while back, and that inflammation or depression was an inflammatory condition. And they were like, what? Like, they were shocked. We still think about inflammation and we first think about like joint pain or something, but it's connected to everything. And it goes back to the gut. And I have to admit, like, for the longest time, I was like, again, I'm a very visual person. I want to be able to see or diagram the cells doing this or this. And this gut, all the gut microbes, we're just really having to trust researchers in this, and the collection of them. And there's so much new research coming out. But gosh, so many of your neurotransmitters, so much of your brain health is determined in your gut and by those gut compounds. I believe it's close to 90% of your serotonin is made in the gut. Serotonin is that, for listeners, it's that feel-good chemical. It's that chemical that most of your medications like Prozac either try to increase or reuptake to make you feel, to alleviate some of the depression. 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut. You've got to have the right collection of microbes. And, the more I learn just with other neurotransmitters, I read something that said, your gut is almost like the puppeteer for the compounds and the neurotransmitters going on in your brain. And again, I really like a diagram. I like to be able to see it, but that kind of resonated with me. I was like, okay, I'm just going to have to trust all this research, this overwhelming research that the gut plays a huge role. But thinking about like your gut is kind of the puppeteer, and how healthy you keep your gut can really determine, your mental wellness, or, help you rein that in. And, like I said, if you're eating an inflammatory diet and you suffer from some of those conditions, you're certainly not going to do your bodies any favor. I have a son with ADHD. And I've seen that firsthand. He takes medication, it works well, but if when he has a lot of junk in his diet, I can tell, it's a little harder for the medicine to work, or we're just, I can see a little more of the ADHD in him, even when he's medicated.
Yeah. And like you said, like, people just don't realize that neurotransmitters are made in the gut. And I think I had read 70% of serotonin is probably even more. Like, that's probably an old number. So it really starts there. So getting that gut health cleaned up, working on just inflammation overall, getting more of the feel-good foods versus not. And it's like, I know how I feel when I eat really crappy food. Like, it's very infrequently, but every once in a while, it's like, I can feel within an hour, I'm tired. I don't have energy. I start to feel bloated. So those episodes are very far and there's not a lot of them, but some people and kids who are eating, a lot of processed foods, and through no fault of their own, or, the parents are doing the best that they can, just really have no idea how much better they can feel if their gut health improved a little bit better. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's becoming a little bit more common knowledge, but I know at least here in the schools, it's not something that's taught. Like, there's just not that brain gut connection really isn't taught. So, parents listening to this can at least, teach their kids a little bit about that too, and know that it can at least come into play with kids' moods. And everybody, I'm saying, but for sure, looking at how it's relating to your moods. And, I always encourage, I don't think it's fun to write down exactly what you're eating all the time. Like, I'm not a big fan of that, but if you're having mood disorders, you could certainly do it for at least a couple of weeks and just say, write down your foods, write down your moods, and see what kind of connection.
Yeah. And, maybe your diet doesn't look that bad on paper, like when you write down, but so then look at what you may be missing.
Right.
because things like omega-3s are huge. They are one of the top anti-inflammatory nutrients, just have a direct, you know, correlation in reducing inflammation. And that's something that we're missing. So it's not necessarily about always about the junk that we're eating. It could be about what we're missing too. You know, those B vitamins and the omega-3s and vitamin D.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. All right, well, let's move on to, what we can find in your cookbook and talk a little bit about meal planning and meal prep. Cause I know that's not always, it's not like a sexy topic to talk about, like, oh, I'm gonna talk about meal planning and what I'm cooking up for my family this week. But it's so necessary, especially when you're trying to make a change and you're trying to get some lower inflammation foods in. It's like, it sounds good in theory, like I'm going to start this week, but really just having all of those things available and doing a little bit of planning is going to set you up for success, because otherwise what's going to happen, you're going to pick your kid up from practice at 5:30 or get done with work and you have no plan. And it's like, oh, there's easy and convenient. So I know that you, like you mentioned before, you really just focused on meals that can be quick and easy for families to throw together. But, give us some of your top strategies on how to even get started with this. Cause I know a lot of families want to have their meals planned out. They want to, be able to go home and have everything available to cook some real quick meals that they know they can feel good about feeding themselves and their families. But it's like, how do you even get started?
Yeah, well, and I want people to know I'm coming from right now in my life. I'm coming from a place where meal prep is the last thing I want to do on Sundays. And a lot of times after working all day, I've got a 12 and 15-year-old and that are just going different directions. And, cooking dinner on a weeknight is a lot of times the last thing I really want to do. And that's really kind of what I base my cookbooks around. It's got to be simple. It's got to be quick. It's got to be good.
Right.
And it's got to have components in it that my kids will eat. I'm not a big fan of the standard meal prep like you see pictured on like social media. Like you see all these like 8 different bowls laid out. It's all the same thing. Because I don't want to, I'm a foodie at heart, then I'm a dietitian. So, I don't want to eat the same thing for, every meal for the next week or, almost every meal. But what I have found is key, and I break this down in my new cookbook, Meals That Heal One Pot. What I have found is key is me doing some grocery shopping on Sunday or whatever your prep day is, getting some key ingredients, and then prepping what I like to call some components. So I try to prep ahead like some kind of protein. So maybe Sunday night we're having grilled chicken for dinner. Well, I will make sure I make a big batch of that chicken so that I have a cooked protein on hand in the fridge that week. I don't necessarily know how I'm going to use it, but it's going to come in handy either for a grain bowl that I throw together. It's ready to heat, quinoa and greens and a dressing or something, or I'm going to throw it in tacos for my son or a quesadilla or something. But I'm going to have some ready to eat protein that I can just heat up and add to things and create meals around. I'm also going to have leafy greens in there. And I'm usually going to have some kind of grain like quinoa or brown rice or something. And, I try to make a big batch maybe once a month, because a lot of people don't realize that grains usually freeze really well if you'll let them cool. And then you can freeze them. So you can make grains ahead of time so that you have them. And then and I actually give a list. I like to identify what meals I'm actually cooking during the week ahead of time before I go to the grocery. But, I give a list in my book of, okay, you hadn't even had time to identify what recipes you're cooking this week. But, all you can do is your grocery shopping on your prep day. So here's kind of a template of what you need to buy, 2 to 3 proteins, healthy proteins, some leafy greens, some fruits, preferably like berries or, some of your lower glycemic ones. Some vegetables that you can roast. If people haven't discovered roasting, it completely changes the taste of vegetables for people who think they don't like vegetables. It is a game changer, but it's also so quick and easy. I mean, I really can't, even when I feel like cooking, I'm like, Carolyn, it's so easy to roast vegetables. That's the minimum you can do, So, I have a template in the book for like, okay, here's what will set you up. Maybe even if you don't know what recipes. And then once you get into the week, you're like, okay, I have chicken, I have quinoa, I have broccoli, here's some ideas that I could use them with for an actual meal that night. So I really encourage prepping meal components, if you will, and stocking the fridge. The other thing that I encourage people to do, because I certainly do it, I rely on them, is, we've got some great brands these days that are much more conscious about the quality of ingredients in things. And so these products, technically they're processed items like a salad dressing or a marinara sauce or something like that. But if you can find those healthier processed ones that use the good quality ingredients, that is key. That's key for me, particularly with salad dressings, particularly like with marinara. I'm trying to think what I buy like almost weekly. Getting those shortcuts and having those on hand. And you used to hear, oh, don't buy it if it's got more than 5 ingredients. Well, it's really not necessarily about the number of ingredients. It's more about what those ingredients are. And so like if I'm shopping for a marinara or a pasta sauce or something, I tell people, look at those ingredients in it. I want to see that the ingredients in that jar are the same or could possibly be the same if I was making a marinara from scratch. If I was making a marinara from scratch from a cookbook, it would say tomatoes, olive oil, garlic, basil, onions, those things. I want to see that that's exactly what's in that jar, So if you can find items that mimic that, that's usually a good quality item. Salad dressings are a little tough because you do want to try to find healthier oils, and there are a few brands that are doing that. Yes. It's hard to find extra virgin olive oil just because it will go bad pretty quick. I think that's why they're not big on using it, but you can find some with olive oil. You can find ones with avocado oil now. So healthier blends of oils. And, I want to see that maybe it has herbs, Dijon mustard, lemon juice, things that I would put in a salad dressing if I was making it homemade, and, a touch of sweetness, like from honey or something towards the end of the ingredient list is okay, because, I'd probably use a touch of sweetness at home in my homemade one, because you need that to balance flavors, So just, thinking through the ingredient list when you pick something up.
I love that tip that you give about the number of ingredients, because I remember when I used to teach that, like, look for 5 ingredients or less. But now it's like, if I pick something up and I see a new product in it, looks deceptive from the label, like, oh, this is organic or whatever. But if it's like organic soybean oil or high fructose corn syrup in one of those 5, I'm like, deal breaker. Like, I'm not even going to put that in my cart.
Yeah.
So you're totally right. And there are a lot of salad dressings, like you mentioned, that have avocado oil, but maybe there's 10 ingredients in there, but they're all clean. So now I think we're moving more like, let's look at clean ingredients that are not inflammatory to the body. Definitely, we still want to keep those ones that sound like a science experiment back and put those back on the shelf. But those are some really great tips. And I think it's so helpful to just have, like you said, like a couple of proteins prepped for the week. And I've tried to start doing that more, like just putting some chicken in my Instant Pot at the start of the week and getting it shredded up, or cooking, 3 or 4 pounds of ground beef. And now I can use it for tacos. I can use it for spaghetti and a sauce. Because we are like, our life, there's just people coming and going, and there's one has at this time, and then we have a match. And then it's like, my husband works really crazy hours. So at least there's something to go to. when they are here. So those are all really
Yeah.
great.
And you don't necessarily need a recipe. I think some people are scared to
Right.
try stuff. Some of my best meals are when I'm like, okay, what's in the fridge? And I'm like, okay, I have, some grilled shrimp. I have some leftover brown rice. I have some greens. I've got this dressing. Let's just combine it.
Right. Cleaning out the fridge.
Yeah, if you have good quality ingredients that are seasoned well, it's hard to mess stuff up.
Right. And I always say it when people are asking me, because I don't give meal plans to people. I'm
Mhm.
like I give recommendations how to balance your meals because I don't know your preferences. I don't know how to
Right.
tolerate different foods, but let's get a protein in there. Let's get a healthy fat source in there. Let's get some sort of fiber and keep it that simple. Like we don't need to go and get all of these crazy ingredients that people have never heard of. I mean, if you want to do that, more power to you, but most people
Yeah.
just won't have that.
It doesn't require that. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't require you going to the health food store. We're just good foods, whole
Yeah.
foods. Yep.
Yep. But it does take a little bit of mental planning and just like
Yes.
getting
Just
the
a little. Yeah.
foods into your house. And I know I almost always just pick groceries up now. Like I don't go through, there's that luxury now too, where you can have
Yeah.
your shopping done for you for very affordably and just go pick things up and then you don't have to spend hours in the grocery store.
Yeah.
So any really time saving kitchen gadgets or things that you really love that you have in your kitchen? I know I use
Yeah.
air fryer a lot. I use I don't know if I want to say it's like I use what is an instant pot? Like it's
Like a crock pot or
pressure cooker. Like I use
pressure cooker. Yeah.
and I use a air fryer a lot.
Yeah. I am pretty simple. I have used Instapot, and I tend to use it more for prep, like to quickly
Yes.
cook chicken, like for chicken salad
Yes.
or for soup or something. Um and I have an air fryer too. And that's been great. For a while there, I felt like I barely turned on my oven.
Right.
I would recommend the ones that look more like a toaster oven because you can do a lot more with them and get a lot more in there. I roast my vegetables in there. We're throwing almost everything in the air fryer. It just takes up space. And in my new book, I do give some recipes that are for the air fryer, the Instapot, the crock pot. But I also made sure that I gave alternative directions for each of those so
Yeah.
that you could still cook those air fryer recipes in your oven, and you could still cook that crock pot or Instapot on the stovetop if you wanted to.
Yeah, because I know my husband's always, whenever I bring anything, he's like, that's not going to sit on our counter. Like, so it is. It's like you want to reduce clutter and you want to, simplify
Yeah.
it in a lot of things. So one more question, and then I would love for you to tell us where we can find all of your amazing cookbooks and if people want more information. But I know I read this about you. I know you're an intermittent faster, and we talk a ton about that on this podcast. So I'm sure people are curious, like, what is your day to day with what do you follow? Because people always want to know. And of course, everybody's protocol is a little bit different for what works for them. But what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting and how do you apply it to your life?
Yeah, so it was a game changer. It's been a game changer for me. I usually do a 16/8. I have done longer, but those aren't a lot of fun. Or you really have to gear yourself up.
Yeah.
I've never really gone beyond 42 hours, but I mean, I can tell there's definite benefits, but just what's doable for me day in, day out is 16/8. It really seems pretty easy. But I have to tell you, I tried it. And I'm not sure what you read on the internet about me and intermittent fasting, but I tried it only because I was writing an article about it. I believe it's for Cooking Line. It's like 2017, 2018. And before that, like I had suffered with like ups and downs and blood sugars, even though I was eating up food. It was not unusual for me to be like ready to eat lunch at like 10:30, and so felt like I'd always been kind of controlled by my blood sugar, even though it was normal and, but those low blood sugar episodes. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to try this fasting thing. I thought, I don't even know if I'm going to make it how far I'm gonna make it into the day. I don't know, like, will I have a job at the end of the day? Like, will I be so me, will I be so hangry that, I've run off everyone around me? Um, so it was just really crazy when I tried it, and I was like, this isn't bad. And then I kept doing it, and I was like, I really like this. And I had been worried about low blood sugar doing it, and I was like, all my blood sugar issues are gone when I do it. It was just crazy. It was just mind blowing to me. And so then, of course, I had to, look more into it, and I always love reading new research on it. But, my hunger decreased, my cravings decreased. I didn't have those dips in blood sugar. In fact, I usually do like 7 to 11 or 12. And, if I get really busy something in the morning, there's been times where I forget to eat till 1 or 2, and I have to remind myself, like, stop and eat. Before that, I didn't miss a meal or a snack, so it really is fascinating. And from an inflammation perspective, it is one of the best things that you can do. All of the research, and, the research looks at various different fasting methods, but the overall consensus is that any type of fasting lowers inflammation. And, and I think the word kind of intimidates people, but I try to tell them, like, everyone already fasts.
Yeah.
Every single person listening to this is already fasting. It's just that point from, when you have your last caloric intake of the day to when you have your next one the next day, that break. So everyone already fasts. We're just talking about extending it a little, but I have found that, and I don't know with all your blood sugar where you found this, what I eat for my last meal of the day makes a big difference on how I feel that next morning and how easy it is for me to fast. If I focus mainly on protein and lower carb veggies and healthy fats, no big deal the next morning. Like, I have my black cup of coffee, I drink some electrolyte water. No big deal. I'm not even hungry. Usually don't even want any food. If I have like more carbs or a carb rich meal, or if I have dessert or, even a glass of wine, my blood sugar's up and down a little the next morning. And it just makes it a little bit harder to, you can stay in the fast. It's more your blood sugar messing with you. It's not your hunger or anything. But it makes it a little more challenging, I found.
Yeah, I felt the same way. And I was just like you. I'm like, there is no way I can even go till 9 o'clock in the morning without eating. Like, when I made it till 9, I was like, whoa, I'm not dead. I feel great. I don't bloat. Yeah. So it was game changer for me as well. So I'm glad to hear that.
I forgot. I'm sorry. The other thing I thought was, like, if I do make it, I thought I'm going to like pig out. So that blew my mind too, that like, when it was time for me to eat, but when I completed my fasting, like, I wasn't really hungry, and I was actually able to make more conscious, better choices. Like, I wasn't being driven by my blood sugar to eat, or, to pick out what I was going to eat.
Yeah, it is. It's an amazing tool. And people are like, and most people on this podcast are intermittent fasters or practice time restricted eating. But I always say, like, a bare minimum of 12 hours. Like, let's just start there. Like, that is, like you said, it's fasting. Let's just get to 12-hour gut rest here and see what happens. Well, it's been wonderful interviewing you, and we've learned a lot, and we would love to hear where to find your cookbooks and where to find more about you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I can be found. I'm most active on Instagram, on social media. It's Carolyn Williams. My handle is Real Food Real Life _RD. And I have a website, carolynwilliamsrd.com, that you can check out. My books, I've got my newest one right here on Meals That Heal, One Pot, which just came out. It is at all major bookstores, all your big box bookstores, but it's also on Amazon. It'll be in some of your smaller bookstores as well, but you can order online, from any of your big stores like Barnes and Noble and stuff, or Amazon. And then my one prior that we mentioned is Meals That Heal. That was the first one that I wrote. And, both are just quick, easy, had to be good. had to be worth my time in the kitchen after work, and things that my kids would tolerate, light, hopefully light, but if not, they had things my kids would eat.
Well, thank you. We'll link all of that in the show notes, and congratulations on your publications and your books getting out to the world. That is not an easy task at all. So we are fortunate that you can make our lives easier with those cookbooks, and we appreciate all the work that you're doing. And I encourage everybody to go and find both Meals That Heal and Meals That Heal One Pot with Carolyn. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.